So this is a new area I'm exploring, and I will start with a story from ancient Greek mythology.
Can you speak a bit louder, please?
Yes. Is it not? Perhaps it's this. Can I be heard now?
Yeah.
Great. Yes, so here in the picture you can see depicted Sisyphus. Is anyone aware of that? Yes, great. So he was the founder and first king of Ephyra, which is now the city called Corinth. And although he promoted navigation and commerce, so quite relevant to what company law is supposed to be doing, he was in fact quite deceitful. He also killed a lot of travelers and guests, which was a violation of what we had in ancient Greece of xenia, which is Greek hospitality. And Greek hospitality also fell under Zeus's domain. So Zeus, the god, was very, very angry with this. So he condemned Sisyphus with punishment in the underworld, which was that King Sisyphus, was now for eternity condemned to be rolling up the hill with a rock and repeating the same process again and again and again. Now, despite my love for Greek mythology, this is not a completely random story. In psychology, we do have the Sisyphus effect, which essentially links to this tale and is intrinsically linked to the lack of finding any purpose in any activity at hand. And today what I'd like to do, by looking at why it is necessary to reform the corporate governance codes in the EU, is to showcase that policy incoherence, because policy coherence is one of the main things that SMART project is aspiring to do, policy incoherence on sustainability issues, I think is the major reason why efforts towards sustainability on separate occasions actually make these efforts meaningless, and how in the bigger scheme of things I think a good starting point is reforming the corporate governance codes of EU member states on grounds of sustainability in order to achieve this very important starting point, which is policy coherence and bringing together corporate governance and sustainability. So what is policy coherence? So according to the OECD definition, the systematic promotion of mutually reinforcing policy actions across government departments and agencies, creating synergies towards achieving the agreed goal. So here obviously that would be sustainability. And what are the links between policy incoherence, the Sisyphus effect, and supporting companies operating sustainably? So looked at this from a behavioral economics point of view, Ariely et al. Have investigated how finding purpose in any task influences labor supply, and conclude that in the more meaningful conditions as compared to the less meaningful ones, known as a Sisyphus condition, a subject's productivity influences labor supply more strongly. So here it is not difficult to understand how demanding performance of an activity that is manifestly pointless because of lack of comparability, accountability, and impact may leave corporations meaningfully disengaged from the overall process, even if corporations are otherwise in favor of actually opting to be more sustainable in the operations per se. So in this sense, I'm trying to make the point that by having separate directives or regulations on transparency, on non-financial reporting, on different factors that investors need to take into account, such as ESG, environmental, social, and governance, cannot be completely detached and separate to the overall goal, because it is policy coherence. So there needs to be an alignment between different institutions, the different legislative initiatives, in order for this activity to actually be meaningful. Otherwise, even if corporations are in principle in favor of sustainability, all these meaningless and pointless efforts on a separate basis through reporting, through engaging in dialogue with certain stakeholders in certain events, become without purpose. So why look at the EU, and what definitions do we have which may be helpful and may be actually a starting point, or have been a starting point but have not been reflected on sufficiently. So the European Commission has often, especially after the financial crisis emerged, made reference to the term sustainability within the field of corporate governance as synonymous to a company's long-term business growth. The Treaty of Lisbon also refers to the term sustainable development, which is different, of course, but again is on the same, let's say, mindset as the term sustainability, refers to it in Article 3, Paragraph 3 of the Treaty of Lisbon, and states that the Union shall establish an internal market. It shall work for sustainable development of Europe based on balanced economic growth and price stability, a highly competitive social market economy aiming at full employment and social progress, and, very important, and a high level of protection and improvement to the quality of the environment. Now, the article structure here, as it has been argued, implies that the promotion of the social objectives outlined here is seen as a goal of the Union on a par with the establishment of the internal market, rather than being viewed as a consequence of it, as it was in the older article. Brunel argued that the provision should thus be read as encouraging the taking of active steps to promote social goals separately from those taken to establish the internal market. So this is, I think, quite important when we come to see also how to reform the corporate governance codes. So in light of all these ideas and these forming the basis of my more focused research and the point I want to make on corporate governance codes, I'm looking at whether doing better, which is obviously what corporate governance codes in the EU aim to do, because they try and see how are corporations going to be more efficient, what structures are more efficient, what type of committees secure impartiality, efficiency. Is doing better actually doing well? Do we also, is it about time that we take the doing well being more important than just doing better in terms of efficiency, thus taking sustainability on board? So that being said, the key questions I try to ask in this paper are: what does history tell us about why the EU has not been consistent to ensure that EU member states see eye to eye on sustainability? Why should we even adopt a separate stakeholder-friendly provision in these corporate governance codes? And why the corporate governance codes of EU member states? Why this soft law instrument? And of course, what is best practice, which obviously is hard to define, but can we see a tension or can we see a complementarity between efficiency and sustainability? And of course, then taking it on a comparative level, looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly, comparing selected corporate governance codes on sustainability. Are they in fact doing a good job? And which one might work as a paradigm for us to look at? And of course, I do have a very specific proposal for reform. So if we look at the history, I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with different stages, the different stages outlined here. So in terms of looking at corporate governance codes and corporate governance as an area of harmonization and reform in the European Union, in the global context, the United Kingdom was the pioneer in 1992. With the Cadbury Report on Best Practice Principles. At an international level, of course, we have the OECD in 1998, which developed global guidelines and also prompted individual member states to adopt their own corporate governance codes. And of course, through all this, the South African code has stood out. King 1 in 1994, and of course there have been revisions thereafter, to be a code that does have a CSR-friendly approach as compared to others which had no provision along those lines, at least when corporate governance codes started to emerge. And of course in 2015 we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which have also been ones that take sustainability concerns on board and have also something to say about corporate decision making by taking on these goals, and of course corporate governance more broadly. Now in the European Union context, harmonization had started by policymakers looking at German corporation law, which at least not stakeholder friendly but was more employee friendly and had more hard law provisions than soft law provisions. But that all changed when the Financial Services Action Plan came forward in 1998, which aimed to make sure that the legislative initiatives secured steps taken towards the single market, and in that sense wanted to facilitate business activity rather than prescribe what business should actually be doing. And as time evolved, we can see that there is a focus on shareholders' interests until the financial crisis erupted in 2008, and since then we can see that the term sustainability and taking on stakeholders' rights and the problems associated with leaving that outside company law has started to feature in EU policy making, and especially looking at the 2018 sustainable finance, where they're actually starting to look at directors' duties vis-a-vis sustainability and investors' duties vis-a-vis sustainability. So sustainability since 2008 has creeped up in these different areas, but it has come to play on a basis of shareholder primacy. So this is why we see, to some extent, why we have policy incoherence and not an alignment, perhaps, between different initiatives. Now, why should we focus on the corporate governance code, and why should we include a specific stakeholder-friendly provision? Now, looking at the theory of deterrence, and there are quite a few authors who have written about this more broadly, regulation can either be seen as a means of providing incentives, both negative in the form of deterrence or behavioral, and position the law in the form of it giving incentives that reward a certain type of behavior. So the corporate governance code would align more with being an incentive tool and a symbolic and an oratory tool, but that doesn't mean that it should be neglected for this reason. And Aries and Breathwaite actually argue that the first priority to regulating problems should actually be solved by appealing to the social responsibility of firms and of it through the means of a soft law approach, and if that fails, then go to deterrence regulation. So there are reasons to also place a lot of weight on the soft law mechanism. And of course, why should we have a stakeholder-friendly provision? It goes back to the history and also what has come out of the 2008 financial crisis, and henceforth we have environmental, social and governance factors that investors are taking into account. We have non-financial reporting, sustainability reporting, and the need for trying to move forward and find different metrics for this, with indicators, for example, for markets to take on board. And we can see that EU laws are changing towards sustainability, but the codes, which are actually there to show what best practice is, and that so that markets can reflect through this disclosure if companies are doing well, are actually left behind. And this, to me, doesn't make any sense at all. So what is best practice? So do we have efficiency and sustainability, or do we need to choose efficiency or sustainability? I think there are ways to find that we can actually facilitate efficiency and sustainability. And as Ha Jun Chang, a South Korean economist, has said, people overproduce pollution because they are not paying for the costs of dealing with it. And of course, this said, if markets cannot value sustainability and hence provide the arguably objective metrics that will account for those costs, then it is fair to say that we can't move towards working in favor of sustainability through the markets. And instead of working against markets, I think the way forward is to see how we can work with the market on this point, because there's been a polarized approach to this. And of course, BATE has provided us with a great paper on when the solution becomes the problem, the triple failure of corporate governance code. So there's a very good overview there already. And of course, as she explains, there exists the problem of all the codes being informed by shareholder privacy, mostly, that the OECD principles also have some limitations. The codes externalize environmental and social impacts. Again, this has to do with the previous point on what markets actually reflect. And that also where codes do have mention of CSR, this could be also seen as being slightly superficial. So when we do look at different problems, other scholars that are not in the law field have also mentioned similar and raised similar points. But I think the main thing I have seen by looking at different codes is that anything that relates to, let's say, anything we would think of sustainability is actually placed in the section of risk management in the codes, not separate to risk management. And I think this makes very clear that they are not addressing the problem on its own accord, and they're not giving it the chance to have its own metrics within this overall policy that the EU is seemingly having by introducing the non-financial reporting initiative as well. This said, the Dutch code, as an example, could be a paradigm because it does focus on the long-term value creation and company culture. It does have a section that provides greater focus on long-term value creation and company culture, with boards having to pay attention to opportunities and risks while weighing the interests of all stakeholders. So it is a step forward. However, again, we can see that there is no separate provision on stakeholders per se. So that's why in my proposal for reform, which aligns with the UN principles for responsible investment, the SDGs, and also aligns with different other initiatives at EU level, especially with the non-financial reporting directive and its recent reform and amendment. I propose that there should be a separate section in these corporate governance codes which addresses the relations specifically with stakeholders. It is not a part of other sections in the code, and it addresses these specific areas which in a summary version do align with different other objectives out there, whether on an international level or through EU initiatives that have emerged ever since the financial crisis has brought sustainability to the forefront and in corporate governance discussions more broadly. So thank you very much.